Welcome back to the FTN NFL Draft Team Preview Series. I'm your host, Mike Randle, Chief Content Officer here at FTN. You can follow me on Twitter at RandleRant. And of course, we have one of the most important teams that we have to talk about here, the Baltimore Ravens. And the guy that I go to who's been fantastic with insight over the last few years is Luke Jones. Follow him on Twitter at Baltimore Luke. He is a Ravens reporter for WNST, BaltimorePositive.com. Luke, thanks so much for joining us. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Mike. It's good to talk to you again.
Yes, excellent as always. And let's go through a season recap before we get to some of the big questions here. Ravens, always a Super Bowl contender, especially over the last few years. But talk to me how the season went here, some ups and downs throughout the year.
Well, I mean, you just said it. Ups and downs are really told the story of the Baltimore Ravens. I think it was a season that they entered with lots of hope, and Lamar Jackson on the final year of his rookie contract and saying, okay, you didn't work out a long-term deal, but you still have Lamar. You still have what looks to be a championship caliber roster in at least most areas. But I think, just a few injuries, not as many as last year, certainly, but a few key injuries, mainly to Rashad Bateman in week 4, their top wide receiver. I think that really hurt them. I think a lot of people wondered if that was going to kind of cap their ceiling a little bit. But certainly when Lamar Jackson goes down in early December, I mean, the Ravens, I think you can feel good in certain ways that you still made the playoffs, but second straight year, Lamar Jackson unable to finish the season. And now it rolls into this contract dispute that's gone on for 2 years now and does not appear to have a resolution in sight, at least in the short term. So, you look at the end of the season, you say 10-7, you make the playoffs. Lots of teams would kill to have that kind of a season, believe me. But in Baltimore, I think it was a season that left you wanting because some of these questions, Greg Roman, who has since been dismissed as offensive coordinator, being one of them, they kind of went unanswered again. And that's where it leaves the Ravens at this inflection point with Lamar Jackson now going into this offseason with him scheduled to become an unrestricted free agent. Is it going to be the franchise tag? Will they work out a long-term deal? After 2 years, I mean, my question is, what's going to change right now? What solutions, what answers did they really find that weren't there a year ago or 2 years ago? And I think that's where you look at the Ravens right now and say, still lots of things to be excited about when you look at this roster. But when you don't have a resolution with your franchise quarterback, it makes it very difficult to focus on much of anything else at this point.
Yeah, especially because the Ravens here, when you're looking at them, Luke, that fumble occurs by Huntley against the Bengals. The entire year could really change here. Things went very drastically. They competed well in that game. Now, like you said, new offensive coordinator with Todd Monken and the questions with Jackson. Let's start with Monken here, who is joining the team now from Georgia.
Yeah, I mean, Todd Monken, of course, he'd been the Georgia offense coordinator the last 3 years. The last 2 years, the Bulldogs having won the national championship. And I think when you look at how the Ravens have profiled in recent years, obviously being a run-first team, look at the Georgia offense over the last couple of years, balance, right? I mean, for as much as you look at what they got out of quarterback play, a former walk-on quarterback in Stetson Bennett and what he became, but you still talk about the Georgia running game and you talk about their defense. And so you look at what he did there, and then you marry that with what he did at his previous stops in the NFL in Tampa Bay and in Cleveland, where they had some prolific passing games, especially in Tampa Bay with Ryan Fitzpatrick and Jameis Winston as his quarterback. So if he could have that kind of passing game in Tampa Bay with quarterbacks of that ilk, imagine what he can do with Lamar Jackson if the Ravens can add a little bit at wide receiver. So I think there's plenty of optimism. I think Todd Monken checks a lot of boxes. Maybe not the prototype coordinator that you think of today, because he is 57 years old. So you're not thinking about an up and coming hotshot coordinator in that sense. But I think the malleability that he's shown to really feature his best personnel, whether it's the tight ends and running backs as it was at Georgia, or if it's more the wide receivers as it was at some of his previous stops in the NFL, I think you have reason for excitement there. But again, when is he going to get a chance to work with Lamar Jackson? If it is a franchise tag situation, if it's more extreme than that and even a trade or something like that, I mean, obviously that's a totally different story. So I think, though, it comes back to, for John Harbaugh and the Ravens, they valued Todd Monken's flexibility and versatility with his scheme that says, hey, with Lamar Jackson, whoever else we bring in, or if it is that more extreme scenario that maybe Lamar Jackson isn't here moving forward long term. I think they feel good about Todd Monken coming in here and making it work, but also maintaining their identity, which is still going to be a large part of it, running the football and relying on their defense, which is the Ravens' identity for as long as I can remember anyway.
And what is the situation? What's your best guess that's going to happen with Jackson here? Because we're on the outside, I'm on the East Coast here. What do you think? Do they want him back? Do they want him back for a certain price? Do you think they're ready to move on? I mean, obviously, dynamic player when he's on, but had the injury trouble, and there just seems to be that hesitancy. So, what is your best guess that's going to happen with Jackson here? We have a March 7th deadline with the franchise tag. A lot of things in play. What do you think is going to happen with Lamar heading into 2023?
Mike, it's the question everyone wants to know. I wish I could sit here and say with strong conviction what I really do think is going to happen, but it's tough to say. I mean, stating the obvious, if we're not going to see a long-term deal struck over the next couple of weeks, as you mentioned, that early March deadline with the franchise tag, he's clearly going to get the tag. Now, the question is going to be, is it going to be the exclusive tag, which is probably going to land somewhere around $45 million, which makes your salary cap situation, which isn't great to begin with, very prohibitive to add a wide receiver, as I mentioned, or to add a cornerback, as they probably could stand to do. I think it makes it very difficult. If you give him the non-exclusive, which is around $32 million, it certainly carries the risk of some other team that is willing to do what the Cleveland Browns did with Deshaun Watson a year ago and give Lamar a fully guaranteed deal. That you run the risk of, if you don't match that, you get 2 first-round picks, as opposed to if you gave them the exclusive and wanted to explore a trade. So I do think the non-exclusive to me is interesting from the sense of, what are you trying to accomplish here? Do you want to get him signed long-term? Or are you just trying to hold on to his rights and just kick the can down the road and maybe he plays under the tag for another year? So my gut tells me they'll give him the exclusive, but I've really been kicking around the idea of, do you give him the non-exclusive? And this gives Lamar a chance to go out and see where his value truly is. Are there other teams that are willing to give him that fully guaranteed deal? We've talked about this in the NFL for over a year, or about a year now, since Watson got the fully guaranteed deal. If another team is willing to give that, it then puts the Ravens at a position where they have to make a decision. Or if he doesn't get that fully guaranteed deal, as some people have opined, and we've seen quarterback deals since Watson not be fully guaranteed, maybe Lamar Jackson then says, okay, what the Ravens are offering me, maybe it's better than I thought, and maybe that deal isn't out there. So that's where I really struggle with the idea of, okay, you're going to hold on to him, give him the exclusive, and then you're going to have to roll the dice and see when he shows up, this spring, summer, or maybe it's into the season. Or do you give him the non-exclusive and say, okay, Lamar, we're not willing to do a fully guaranteed deal. And I don't think there's any more willingness that they had a year ago with him having had another injury and finishing the season unavailable. So I don't think that's changing on the Ravens end, but force Lamar's hand, let him go out there and seek his value a little bit. And if there's a team that's out there that's willing to give him a fully guaranteed deal, then the Ravens can reassess. Or they say, okay, it's a difficult decision. We're not willing to do it. We'll take our 2 first-round picks. So I think it'll be the exclusive, but the argument I just laid out is where I think if you really want to get some action done, and if you really, truly want to get a long-term deal and you want to marry Lamar Jackson for the long term, I do wonder if you take that risk of the non-exclusive just to force some action one way or the other. And it forces Lamar to make a decision, or it forces ultimately you to make a decision if another team out there says, hey, we'll give them 5 years fully guaranteed. And then the Ravens will at least know that we need to make our decision here, or we'll take our first-round picks and we have to kind of reset or reload, so to speak, which certainly easier said than done when you're talking about a former MVP at quarterback.
Yeah, so there's some questions, of course, with Jackson. We'll see what's going to play out shortly. There are certainly questions on the offense in terms of the receivers. Obviously, had the injury to Bateman, did not have a receiver go over 500 yards. Death taxes and Mark Andrews is great, but I also want to talk about some questions at running back because J.K. Dobbins, of course, very vocal about wanting the ball a little bit more. Good, stable, good group of running backs for the Ravens there. Talk about the offense as a whole, wide receiver, running back questions, and whether it's Lamar or not, what you think their focus is going to be here heading into next season.
Well, I mean, they've got to find a way to get better at wide receiver. I mean, guys like me in Baltimore have been banging the table about that, going back to the days of Joe Flacco, and you could really even go back further than that if you really wanted to in the history of this franchise. For as much success as the Ravens have had, wide receiver has been a blind spot for them. It's been a spot where they've tried to draft in recent years. Mixed success. I mean, Marquise Brown, Hollywood Brown wasn't a bad first round pick, but you look at some of the guys that were drafted after him, you'd say, well, they could have done better there. And he's since been traded, of course. Bateman has flashed the ability, but he's got to stay healthy. He's missed roughly half of their games over the last 2 years, and he's coming off of a Liz Frank injury, which that foot injury can be tricky sometimes. So they have to get better at wide receiver. What's tricky, though, is what I mentioned, their salary cap picture. It's not ideal. And also, you look at their draft, they have a first round pick, but they don't have a second round pick. So are you going to count on a early day 3 or late day 2 pick to move the needle for you there? So I think they have to try to get a veteran. Lots of Ravens fans are dreaming about a trade for DeAndre Hopkins. I just don't know if it's going to be feasible from a salary cap standpoint, but they have to get better there. There's no question about that. You mentioned running back. I think it's certainly they're in much better shape there when you look at J.K. Dobbins and how well he played at the end of last season, but he's entering a contract year. Gus Edwards, their number 2 running back, is entering a contract year, and his cap figure is just north of $5 million. That's not great when I'm talking so much about the salary cap here. So I really do feel, first of all, J.K. Dobbins will, I think, carry a bigger part of the workload. I think with Todd Monken, even though you look at him at Georgia, it was a timeshare there as well. Greg Roman has long been known for spreading the load around with his running backs. I think it'll be Dobbins being featured more prominently, but because of what I just mentioned, would not be shocked to see the Ravens look maybe early day 3 to take a running back and kind of restock there, because are you going to give J.K. Dobbins a long-term deal given his injury history, given the fact that if Lamar is here long-term, you've got a very expensive quarterback, and Gus Edwards being on a contract year as well. So I think they certainly feel good about that for that position for 2023. It's not like wide receiver, but I do think some long-term planning is in order there for a running back. And I think you'll see them look later in the draft to try to address that.
All right, and last question, we'll get you out of here. This is great stuff. So many big questions here, Luke, for the Ravens. We appreciate a few minutes. Like you mentioned, they have the 22nd pick overall, round 3, round 4, round 5, and round 6. They did get Roquan Smith, of course, which actually paid huge dividends because he really solidified their defense there. So talk about the focus, like you said, that first round pick, where they're going to go, any defensive changes, because the Ravens, when we think of the Ravens, solid defense running the football. Certainly seems like Monken's going to continue that. Going to get through the issues with Jackson and figure that out. But the foundation of this team is that defense here. Will that continue? Will they make any moves? And then, like you said, that first pick, where do you think they're going with that?
Well, I think it's tricky because I just spent so much time talking about the offense and wide receiver, right? And not knowing what's going to happen with Lamar Jackson. I mean, if they end up trading Lamar, which I'm not predicting, but if they do, then we're talking about drafting a quarterback in the first round with picks you would presumably acquire. But on that defense, you just said it. I mean, they certainly a very strong defense, but Marcus Peters is going to become a free agent. He's 30 years old. He came back from the ACL this year. He only missed a few games. I mean, he was relatively healthy. Is he the same guy that he was 3 years ago? Do you need to invest maybe a first-round pick if it's not wide receiver? I certainly could see corner because that's the one spot. They have some younger guys at corner. I think they more profile as your number 4 corner, a guy that might be your number 3 outside corner. I'm not sure if any of them are ready to step into that outside corner role opposite Marlon Humphrey. So I really look at the cornerback position. I think they're going to have to do something there. I think if I had to bet right now, I feel like first round, that would be where they go. And again, pre-combine, pre-pro days, we don't know. We're just throwing out a dart, but that's certainly a position that they need to address. The other position where they've got young guys that they've drafted, Odafe Owe 2 years ago, and David Ajabo in the second round last year. But edge rushers, the pass rush, Justin Houston's going to be 34. He's going to be a free agent. He had 9.5 sacks. Do you go back to that well and try to squeeze another year out of him? Or do you try to look to draft another edge rusher? So they've got young guys and early draft picks invested there. So not quite as urgent as corner, but I definitely think corner is the one spot on that defense that they've got to bring someone in to at least compete with some of those younger guys that I mentioned that I think still profile better as backups.
Well, folks, there you go. Baltimore Luke on Twitter. When I have questions about the Ravens, I go to Luke. He just outlined every possibility there for us. Luke, we appreciate a few minutes here. We're excited about the NFL draft. Ravens are one of those big teams that we're focusing on here. A lot of questions. Answers are going to come shortly, but thank you so much for a few minutes. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Mike. Always good to talk to you, and we'll talk again soon.
Absolutely.